Hello again, everyone. So we are powering our way through Unit 2, Humans versus Bacteria, my favorite unit of the entire school year. And we are still in our 5E of the Black Death. All right. And this is our lesson 3, which is our Explain 2. So by now, we already spoke about the rock pocket mice investigation that we did prior to this lesson. And it was all about natural selection, right? We saw that one environment favored the light colored mice. And then when the environment changed after that volcanic eruption and the terrain of the desert started to become darker in color, we saw that it shifted and natural selection actually favored the dark colored mice. Now we're just going to kind of explain what we were doing in that lab and just some more explanations for natural selection. So our aim says, how did some people survive the Black Death? All right, now our do now says, how could natural variations in immune systems of medieval humans have contributed to their survival during the Black Death? And when we talk about natural variations, in terms of variations, we're really just talking about their genetic makeup, right? Everyone has different genes, right? And those different genes either help, harm, or have a neutral effect on our ability to survive and reproduce, right? So how does these natural differences in our genes, in our immune systems, or in the medieval humans' immune systems, how have they contributed to their survival during the Black Death? All right. And if we read through the answer choices, what we should come up with is A. Some people may have had stronger immune systems that allowed them to fight off the disease more effectively. If I'm able to fight off the disease more effectively, then I'm able to survive better. If I'm able to survive better, then I'm likely able to reproduce and pass on those more effective genes to the next generation of offspring, which are more likely to survive the same thing that I did. Is it 100% guaranteed ever? No. That's not always 100% guaranteed, but that is what the hope is. All right? And just for this, I want you guys to think for questions like this, that some people survived COVID-19 infection and some didn't. This is going to be true for pretty much any disease that affects humans. Some people are going to survive and some people just simply aren't, right? And that's because we have different variations in our immune systems. It's just the way that nature intended. And unfortunately, there's not really much that we can do about it. All right? But let's power through. So part A, natural selection text. Just like the rock pocket mice, human populations change over time, and they possess variations that might become beneficial if the environment changes. Let's look at how variations in the human immune system may have played a role in surviving the Black Death. All right? So one thing that I definitely want to annotate here for us is that it says human populations change over time. This term changing over time just means to evolve. So anytime that we're talking about evolution, we're talking about a change over time. The population is changing, not the individual themselves, okay? And again, they possess variations, and these variations are genetic variations. All right, to be specific. Now, our guiding question, how could genetic variations in the immune system of medieval humans contribute to their survival during the Black Death? Let's read our natural selection text, and then we're going to fill out our claim evidence reasoning chart. So let's read. First paragraph. The changes in the rock pocket mice population explored in class is the result of natural selection. Again, this is going to come up a lot during the school year, so it's important that we understand what that means. Evolution by natural selection is the process first described by two scientists, Charles Darwin and his contemporary Alfred Russel Wallace. Both scientists observed that all organisms are engaged in a struggle or competition for resources in their environment. So anything from bacteria to humans to plants, all of them engage in some type of struggle for resources, competition for resources, whether that's mates, food, space, water, so many different things that they're competing for, okay? Now, natural selection is the process by which organisms that are better adapted to their environment tend to survive and reproduce more offspring that have similar traits. This entire sentence is really important, guys, right? Those that have the favorable adaptations, the favorable genetic traits, tend to survive and reproduce. This is the only thing that nature cares about among populations of any organism, your ability to survive and reproduce, right? And you'll have more offspring, which is the next generation, that have similar traits. Let's continue. Over time, natural selection can lead to changes in populations, right? So over time, right, as the population is evolving, natural selection is going to select the ones that have the favorable adaptations to survive. And if they're able to survive until reproductive age, then they're going to be able to reproduce more offspring, leading to a change in populations, much like we saw with the rock pocket mice. They started out more lighter in color until the environment changed, and then it started to favor the darker colored mice, and they were able to survive and reproduce better with the new environment, okay? All diversity on Earth that we can see today is ultimately due to populations changing over time due to natural selection, all right? In the pocket mice, we saw that the mice population, natural variation in their fur color, in the pocket mice, sorry, we saw that the mice population had natural variation in their fur color. These variations arise from mutations, which are changes in DNA sequences, specifically in sex cells, which are eggs and sperm. All right, so a mutation just means a random change in your DNA sequence. And as a result of that random change in DNA sequence, it introduces a new variation. That's why it says variations arise, right? It introduces a new variation that could potentially be beneficial or very harmful or have no effect at all. But in order for it to be passed down, it has to be present in either an egg or sperm cell, right? Because those have to come together to produce the next set of offspring, the next generation, okay? So if I just had to sum that up, mutations must be present in egg and or sperm cells in order to be passed down to the next generation. Okay, that's what that's saying. All right, now, these variations are found in some individual and not others because of sexual reproduction. Sexual reproduction just means the joining of an egg and sperm in order to make another offspring. It doesn't necessarily have to do with, you know, doing the do. It just means that the egg and the sperm have joined together. In other words, sexual reproduction generates eggs and sperm that contain a variety of possible traits, right? So every egg and every sperm has a different set of traits, a different variation of traits. These genetic variations are heritable, meaning that they can be passed from one generation to the next, right? So in order for me to have been here or for you to have been here, sorry about the sirens outside, just try to ignore it. But in order for me to be here or in order for you to be here, right? Our parents had to get together, right? And the sperm from dad and the egg from mom had to join together in order to produce us 9 to 10 months later. Okay, that's all that that's saying. That's what heritable means, that is, it can be passed down. All right. Now, humans as a population also have variations. Look around at your classmates, or in this case, if you're watching this at home, look around at even your family. All right. Some variations we can easily see, right, such as height and eye color are examples. However, many of the differences between people are traits that we cannot see. For example, some people make an enzyme known as lactase as an adult. These people are able to easily digest lactose, which is the sugar that's found in milk. Other people do not produce this variation. They are what's known as lactose intolerant and cannot easily digest milk. Another example is blood type. Humans have different blood types, but this trait is not visible by just looking at someone. All right? Now, this I'm going to start priming you guys for. All right? This is a unit 3 concept. We're still on unit 2, but just remember this for unit 3. Okay, about lactase, right? So I love dairy. I love anything that has milk in it, cheese, yogurt, um, ice cream. I love anything like that. But it also agrees with my body. And the reason why is because I actually produce an enzyme that helps me to digest that sugar that's found in milk, lactose. Other people that whenever they drink milk, a couple hours later, they might feel queasy, they might feel nauseous, they might feel like throwing up, they might have diarrhea. That's because it doesn't agree with their body because they likely don't produce this enzyme. All right. So that's all based on variations. The two variations are being able to produce lactase, which is the enzyme, or not being able to produce it. And as a result of that, that's going to determine if you're able to use milk as a resource or not use milk as a resource. That's all that this is saying. If I produce this enzyme, I can drink milk. If I don't produce this enzyme, my body cannot use any of the nutrients that's found in milk, the sugar that's found in milk. And if you remember from unit 1, marathon runner, why are sugars so important, such as glucose? All right, something to think about. All right, natural variation and disease survival. Humans also possess variations in their immune system. Scientists have been studying variations in the immune system to better understand why some people died during the Black Death and others did not. One group of scientists have been studying bones from very old cemeteries in London and Denmark. Those are both in Europe. They took genetic samples, DNA samples, from almost 500 people that lived and died during a 100-year window before, during, and after the plague. After they extracted the sequenced DNA from the bones, the team found an astonishing 245 gene variants in the immunity genes that rose and fell in frequency before and after the time of the Black Death. Changes in one gene were shown to be most important, a gene called ERAP2, or ERAP2, ERAP2 gene. And what does this gene do? Well, this gene helps immune cells recognize and fight threatening viruses. So is it a benefit for me to have this ERAP2 gene turned on and be able to fight off these threatening viruses and pathogens? You betcha. I want this gene to be present in my DNA because it's going to help me fight off the bad guys. But does everyone have that ERAP2 gene turned on? No, it might be present, but it might not be helping to do anything, right? Which would leave you more vulnerable to something like the Black Death. The scientists confirmed that it can also suppress the bacteria that causes the bubonic plague, Y. pestis, right? So not only is this ERAP2 gene great at fighting off threatening viruses, but it can help suppress the bacteria that causes the bubonic plague. Oh man, I hope nature is on my side. I definitely want to have this gene because it's going to help me fight off the Black Plague. All right? As we are talking about a lot of these things in this unit, we're going to focus very heavily on something called CER, which is claim evidence reasoning, right? So CER equals claim evidence and reasoning, right? And when we're talking about claim evidence reasoning, there might be a claim that is stated, this is beneficial in blah, blah, blah. That might be the claim. Evidence, I'm going to look through my notes. I'm going to look through any videos that I was required to watch or jot down, and even the investigations that we've discussed in class to find evidence that either supports or refutes that claim. Then for reasoning, I'm just going to give like a brief scientific reasoning as to why that evidence helps to support that claim. What's the science behind? Okay? So we have our first here. Scientists confirm that it can also suppress the bacteria that causes the bubonic plague, Y. pestis. Anytime that I underline something like this, I'm going to think to myself, is this a causal or correlational relationship? Okay? This happens to be causal. And the reason why is because it's definite, right? I don't have to speculate. It says scientists confirm, therefore it must be true. And they've tested that this ERAP2 gene can suppress the bacteria that causes the bubonic plague. This is what I know as something true. If it was correlational evidence, then I'd be saying, that might be helping to suppress the bacteria that causes it, but there might be other factors as well that helps to do that. In this case, they're telling us that it's been confirmed that this gene and this gene alone helps to suppress the bacteria. So I know that that's a causal piece of evidence that's there, which is very strong evidence for us. Let's continue reading. We're powering our way through. People that were lucky enough to be born with the protective version of the ERAP2 gene, hopefully that's me and you, that gives some immunity to the bacteria were twice as likely to have survived the plague than those that inherited the version of the gene that was not as protective. So everyone has this ERAP2 gene, but the effectiveness is what's different in everyone. Some people have super effectiveness and some people don't have much effectiveness at all. But those that did have super effectiveness and gives like some immunity to the bacteria were twice as likely to have survived the plague as opposed to those that didn't have the gene variant that was as protective, right? So hopefully we are among the lucky people that have the protective version of the ERAP2 gene. Furthermore, they found that the percentage of people in London that had the protective version of the gene increased by 10% after the plague and by approximately 30% in Denmark, right? So this is interesting, right? If it's telling me that they're twice as likely to have survived the plague, this is telling me that this is a favorable trait. And when I say a favorable trait or favorable adaptation, I'll put adaptation. This is anything that's going to help me to survive and reproduce. If I have this adaptation where I'm twice as likely to survive the plague, then I'm able to survive. That's half of the battle there. And I'm more likely to reproduce and pass on that favorable trait to my offspring. Does that mean that my offspring will 100% get it? No. But does it increase my chances of that? Yes, which is what we want. That's all we can ever really hope for. And it actually tells us that in London, some people had the protective version of the gene, and it actually increased by 10% after the plague, right? And why did it increase? I don't know. And by 30% in Denmark. So I can make the annotation here that an increase of gene variant frequency over time, right? We care about this happening over time. Should help combat the infection, right? The Black Death infection or bubonic plague. Should it reappear? Right? If this frequency in gene in London, it's increasing by 10% over time, and in Denmark by 30% over time, this is something that we want, right? And if it's increasing in frequency, then it must be a favorable adaptation in that environment. And if the environment has the Black Death running rampant, then I'm gonna want this ERAP2 gene. I'm gonna wanna be a part of that 10% in London or that 30% in Denmark, okay? Just in case it does come back, I have a better chance of fighting it off if I have that gene present. Therefore, people that had the protective gene were more likely to survive, reproduce, and pass the gene for immunity onto their children. Right? That's what we want, right? This is going to result in increasing the number of people in the population that have that gene, right? Again, we care about the population. Whenever we're talking about natural selection, we care about the frequency of the gene over the entire population, not the individual, right? Because some people will have it, some people will not. But as long as some people that do have the favorable adaptation, they'll be able to carry on the human legacy, if you will. But those that don't, unfortunately, might meet their demise. It just all depends. Okay, so whenever we're talking about natural selection, we care about over time, not the individual organism. Okay? Because all of this happened over the course of a couple of generations, this is the fastest example of human evolution ever studied. Usually, human evolution takes hundreds or even thousands of years. But because this was happening over a couple of generations, then scientists were able to track it much better, right? Because we don't live to be thousands of years old. So the same scientists that studied something 1,000 years ago are not the same ones that are studying the same thing today. So finding those correlations is a little difficult, okay? Let's conclude. Today, the protective variant of ERAP2 is found in about 45% of the British population, right? London is in Great Britain. And if we look at the British population, it literally went from going up 10% in London to now 45% in all of Great Britain. However, let's switch to red. Having this variant today may have a cost because it has been associated with autoimmune disorders such as Crohn's disease or rheumatoid arthritis. right? So even though this is helping us to survive something like the Black Death, it's also being stated that having this gene, this variant, this protective variant, might be associated with an autoimmune disorder such as Crohn's disease and rheumatoid arthritis. This is what we would call a trade-off, right? Where we're talking about a cost benefit, right? In order for something to benefit me, it might cost me something. That's the trade-off. If I want to fight off the Black Death, I want this gene. But if I have this gene, this ERAP2 gene, the protective variant of the ERAP2 gene, I'm more likely to develop something like Crohn's disease and rheumatoid arthritis, as they stated here. Okay? All right, now we are at our claim, evidence, and reasoning. And you know what? I'm gonna go through the first claim with you, but the next two, you guys are gonna do on your own. All right, so I'm gonna just use this as a guinea pig. So our first claim says genetic variations in the immune system contributed to the survival of some people during the Black Death. All right. And for our evidence, it gives us a prompt. It says, which gene variant was associated with increased survival during the Black Death? And then it also says, how did this gene affect people's immune response to the plague bacteria? Right? So it's the same gene that we've been talking about, the ERAP2 gene, protective gene variant. Right? I want the protective version of this gene that's here. That's what was helping us to survive the Black Death. We're twice as more likely if we have this protective gene variant of ERAP2 to survive, right? That helps to support this claim. That's the evidence that supports the claim. We'll put support here. We want evidence that supports the claim. All right, and then for the second one, it says, how did the gene affect people's immune response to the plague bacteria? Well, it helps the immune system fight pathogens including Y. pestis, the bacteria that causes the bubonic plague. Right? So we answered both questions. The first bullet, the ERAP2 protective gene variant, was the variant that helped to increase the survival during the Black Death. And then how did it do that? Well, it helps the immune system fight pathogens, including Y. pestis, which is the bacteria that causes the bubonic plague. Now, for our reasoning, it says, why would possessing a protective version of the ERAP2 gene give people an advantage during the Black Death? How does this relate to natural selection, right? So if they have it, then they have a stronger immune response to the infection, right? Is it possible to survive the Black Death without this protective gene variant? Yeah, but am I likely to? Not really. But if I have the gene variant, am I more likely to survive? Yes, and that's because, right? The reasoning is is the science behind it. It provides a boost in immunity, a stronger immune response to the infection. Okay? And now for the second question, it says, how does this relate to natural selection, right? Well, it increases, so we have an increased chance to survive and reproduce, right? That's the only two things that we ever care about when it comes to natural selection, our ability to survive and reproduce, right? And pass on the favorable traits to future generations. See, claim evidence reasoning sounds scary, but it really shouldn't be, right? We're finding support in our evidence to support that claim, and then we're just stating the reasoning behind that claim, all right? And those prompts are there to help you with your claim evidence reasoning. And in fact, I'll let you in on a little secret. Your performance tasks for this unit is all claim evidence reasoning. So it's very important that you know how to fill out a claim evidence reasoning, okay? And I'll read each claim just for a little bit of help, but you guys are going to try this one on your own, and I believe in you guys. So the second claim says, we can label these claims, right? This is claim 1, this is claim 2, and this is claim 3. So claim 2, natural selection can cause certain traits to become more common in a population. You guys can definitely find evidence that supports that certain traits become more common, all right? And then the evidence prompts say, how did the number of people with the protective gene change after the Black Death in London and Denmark? Look at those percentages. What happened to the frequency of the gene in these populations? So over time, what happened to the frequency of seeing those genes present in a population of humans? And then the reasoning prompt says, why did the protective gene become more common in the population after the plague, right? So why did we see that the protective gene became more common in the population after the plague? Why does that make sense to me? We have to reason. And then finally, prompt 3 says, sexual reproduction and genetic variation are essential for natural selection to occur, right? So our evidence support says, how do genetic variations in a population of rock pocket mice arise? So it's asking you to make a recall back to the rock pocket mice investigation. And how do they relate to natural selection? So the genetic variations in the rock pocket mice, how did they first come to be? What did the video say, right? And what does the reading say about how we get new variations in populations? What specifically has to happen might have something to do with DNA, right? What's happening to DNA? And what role does sexual reproduction play in a generation of genetic variation in humans, right? So when we talk about sexual reproduction, again, we're talking about the joining of the egg and the sperm to make the next offspring. So what role does the joining of the egg and the sperm play in a generation of genetic variation in humans? All right? And then finally, for our reasoning, right? Reasoning through our explanation. Why is genetic variation important for natural selection? And how does it influence the survival of individuals in changing environments? Think about the rock pocket mice, right? The changing environment was that volcanic eruption, right? When the environment changed after the volcanic eruption, how did that influence the survival of those mice? Which mice survived and why did they survive, right? What were the two variations in fur color? What was the reasoning as to why some of the light colored survived better in the beginning, and then all of a sudden it seemed like the dark colored ones were the ones that were more fit to survive in their environment after it changed, okay? You guys are absolutely amazing. I believe in you. Just make sure that you get all of these great annotations that we have here, and we have one more elaborate lesson before our first performance task and the end of this 5E sequence of the Black Death. All right, you guys are absolutely amazing, and I'll see you next time. Bye.